In the summer of 1786, the Mississippi River burned like brass under the Natchez sun. The town was proud, loud, and rich from cotton, tobacco, and slaves. Traders and planters filled the taverns, drunk on rum and greed, talking of shipments and bodies as if they were sacks of grain. No man was more respected, or more feared, than Bartholomew Crane, the banker of Natchez. Always in perfect dress, polite and sharp as a knife, he was the man who lent gold to those who bought and sold lives. But behind his polished smile, his empire was collapsing. For months the crops had failed, floods had ruined farms, and debts went unpaid. At night, Crane sat in his candle-lit study, sweating through his fine shirt, staring at ledgers that blotted red ink. His wife, Eleanor, stepped in quietly. She was only 23, pale and graceful, with black hair that shone like silk. She looked at him with worried eyes. "Bartholomew, you haven't eaten in 2 days." He looked up, hollow-eyed. "I've eaten plenty. Panic feeds me." She smiled faintly. "Is it the cotton buyers again?" "Worse," he muttered. "The merchants in New Orleans want their money. 10,000 pounds of silver. If I fail, they'll take everything. Then sell the land," she whispered. "We can start over. We don't need so much." But her kindness struck a darker thought in his mind, an idea he could not speak aloud. That night, when she was asleep, Crane took his carriage to the river. A ship called the Seraphine had just arrived from Havana. Its captain, Lucien Delacroix, was famous for dirty business, contraband, relics, and darker things. Inside the captain's cabin, thick with rum and heat, Crane confessed his ruin. He begged for a loan, offered deeds and gold as security. Delacroix listened quietly, then said, "There are other forms of payment. Gold fades. Flesh endures." A Crane frowned. "You mean slaves?" The captain's smile was thin, of a kind. "In the islands, the old spirits still trade. The body of a pure woman can call them. For wealth, for disease, for death, depending on the ritual." Crane's throat tightened. You speak of witchcraft. Call it business of the soul." Delacroix said, "Offer your wife for one sacred night, and your debts will vanish. But speak of it, and the blessing turns to ruin." A Crane wanted to laugh, to walk out, but greed chained his feet. 3 nights later, Delacroix came to the mansion with 2 robed men. Eleanor thought it was a prayer ceremony to bless their home. They led her to the cellar, where candles burned in a ring of salt and the air smelled of rum and ashes. Crane stood behind a thin curtain. Delacroix handed him a vial. "Drink, and stay silent. If you speak, all is lost." The liquid scorched his throat and locked his tongue. He watched as Eleanor lay on the floor, trembling. The priest drew black marks on her skin. She turned her head and saw him. "Bartholomew, help me," she cried. He tried to move but couldn't. The chanting grew louder. Wind howled through the cellar. Candles bent backward. Eleanor screamed as invisible hands touched her, and something unseen slipped beneath her flesh. Then darkness took him. At dawn he woke on the cold floor. The cellar was empty. He ran through the house until he found her in the garden, humming softly among the roses. Her face was calm, her eyes bright. "Good morning, my love," she said. "I dreamt of wings." From that day fortune returned. Debtors paid. The bank overflowed. Merchants sent gifts. Bartholomew Crane became a legend. But Eleanor changed. She wandered the halls at night, whispering to no one. Servants heard laughter in locked rooms, faint footsteps on empty floors. She ate like she hadn't in days, yet grew thinner, almost shining under the moonlight. Then sickness came. It began with the slaves in the gardens, then the children, then the elders. Fevers rose like fire. Bodies turned yellow, eyes blood, and people vomited black. Doctors called it the black vomit, a strange new plague. It spread from the docks to the plantations, killing hundreds each week. Eleanor watched the dying from her window, silent. One night, Crane found her outside in her nightdress, the wind tearing through her hair. "They call it judgment," she whispered. "But whose?" He grabbed her shoulders. "What happened that night, Eleanor? What did they do to you?" She looked up, eyes glinting like glass. "You sold me, Bartholomew. But the buyer did not come for gold. He came for souls, and under the moonlight he saw thin black veins spreading beneath her skin, alive, pulsing like roots under flesh. The summer deepened, and Natchez began to rot from within. The air itself seemed cursed, a mix of river mud, rotting fruit, and burnt sugar. The buzz of flies filled every street, and the sick staggered through alleys, too weak to bury the dead. Smoke rose from the overflowing cemetery like a dying heartbeat. The Crane mansion stood at the edge of town, black against the golden sky. Locals swore it breathed. Shadows shifted inside, and sometimes, a faint white figure appeared at the windows. The few who dared to look claimed they heard a woman singing in a language older than the Mississippi itself. Bartholomew Crane wandered through the empty halls, half awake, half dreaming. His reflection no longer followed him. Mirrors had turned black, swallowing his image. Sometimes he heard footsteps behind him, only to realize they were his own. He had stopped sleeping. Nights were long and silent, broken only by the distant moans of fevered slaves or the soft whisper of wind through cracked shutters. Candle flames bent unnaturally, as if recoiling from the dark presence that had entered his home. At the same time, the townspeople were falling faster than anyone could count. The priests tried to help, but even they succumbed. Rumors spread, the banker's wife walks at night. Wherever she steps, the sick rise again. One night, Crane heard laughter, a soft, chilling melody floating from the attic. He followed it, finding Eleanor sitting by the window, moonlight casting her in an ethereal glow. Her eyes were wider than normal, pupils dilated, and her skin unnaturally pale. She hummed in the strange language that had haunted the town for weeks. "Eleanor," he whispered, stepping closer, "come back downstairs. You must stop this." She turned slowly, her voice calm yet haunting. "Stop it. The fever isn't mine, Bartholomew. You opened the door, and now it walks." Outside, the fog thickened, twisting along the river like a living thing. Crane could hear the sick calling, crying for relief, their voices mixing with Eleanor's hum. He realized that every action he had taken, every bargain he had struck, had only fed the sickness. The next evening, Reverend Mather appeared at the mansion, pale and trembling. "Mr. Crane," he said, "your wife, the townspeople say she walks with the fevered. We must end this. Bring her to the church, bless her, purify her." Crane nodded, the weight of his own guilt heavier than ever. That night, they carried Eleanor to the empty church by lantern light. Pews were vacant, save for the trembling altar boys and the priest. Eleanor walked calmly to the altar, barefoot, hair loose and flowing like midnight silk. Reverend Mather sprinkled holy water. At first, she didn't react. Then steam rose from the droplets as if they had touched something otherworldly. A piercing scream shattered the night. Candles blew out. When light returned, the altar boys were gone. The Reverend lay on the floor, chest blackened, blistered. Eleanor stood untouched, whispering softly in that ancient, inhuman tongue. Crane fell to his knees. "Please stop this. Who are you?" She looked at him, eyes now fully black. "I am still your wife, Bartholomew, but you made a bargain. You cannot undo what you set in motion." Her hands were ice cold. Yellow streaks, like fevered bile, ran down her cheeks. Crane's throat tightened as fear and love collided. He tried to speak, but no words came. Around them, the church seemed to breathe. The walls expanded, then contracted as if alive. The floors creaked beneath invisible weight. He realized this plague was no ordinary sickness. It was Eleanor transformed, a conduit of a supernatural debt. Crane carried her back to the mansion at dawn. Streets were silent. Smoke rose from burned-out homes. The few remaining survivors cowered inside, peeking through broken shutters. Inside, Crane locked Eleanor in her room. He sat outside, pistol in hand, listening to the soft, echoing steps. Hours passed. He could hear her humming, weeping, laughing, all in the span of minutes. Her voice was no longer human. It carried something older, something endless. By evening, Crane could no longer tell if she was alive. He opened the door. Eleanor sat on the bed, calm, almost sorrowful. Curtains fluttered though windows were closed. "Bartholomew," she whispered, "do you love me?" He nodded, tears streaming. "Then let me go," she said. "You cannot end what I have become. But you can end the suffering." Crane raised his pistol. His hands trembled violently. "You cannot save even yourself," she said softly. Then she touched his face, fingers like ice, leaving a dark, spreading mark. He dropped the gun. Fever surged through him, burning from skin to bone. The world blurred. He fell. When he awoke, night had fallen. The mansion was silent. A Crane staggered to a mirror. His reflection stared back, skin yellowed, eyes rimmed in red. The mark on his cheek pulsed like a heartbeat. From the hallway, Eleanor's voice called, soft and melodic, "The debt is never paid." He followed the voice to the front door. Outside, golden mist swirled along the garden. Eleanor stood waiting. Behind her, hollow-eyed figures swayed, men, women, children, all yellow-skinned, mouths open in endless whispers. "The fever spreads," she said. "It wants what it is owed." Crane stumbled back. "I never meant—" "But you did," she said. "Every choice you made led to this." She reached for him. Trembling, he took her hand. It was empty, neither warm nor cold. As he touched her, the fever left his body. His pain vanished. Around him, the garden turned black. The ground cracked. The river beyond churned, rising high with yellow foam. In the distance, a church bell rang once, and then fell silent forever. By morning, the Crane mansion was empty. Servants, banker, wife, all gone. Only the stench remained sweet, sickly, heavy. Travelers passing through Natchez said the house stood abandoned for years, windows dark, roses blooming blood, red, thriving in soil of decay. On moonlit nights, some swore they saw a woman in white walking the riverbank, her reflection moving a heartbeat late. Sometimes, a soft whisper floated on the wind, "The debt is never paid." By August, Natchez was silent. The air no longer carried the sound of carts or church bells, only the hum of flies and the moan of the river. The fever had burned through every home, every plantation, leaving streets lined with shuttered windows and doors nailed shut from the outside. The few who survived stayed locked indoors, too weak to bury the dead. From the hilltop, you could see smoke rising from the old cemetery like a dying heartbeat. Even the priests had fled. On the edge of town stood the Crane mansion, black against the gold sky. People swore it was breathing. Some said the windows pulsed at night like the eyes of a living thing. Others said they heard a woman singing in a language older than the river itself. One afternoon, a steamboat drifted down the Mississippi, its crew sick and desperate. They saw the Natchez shoreline littered with corpses. But near the Crane estate, flowers still bloomed, bright yellow and red, thriving in soil that smelled of decay. When one sailor tried to step ashore, the captain stopped him. "Not there," he warned. "That's the place the fever was born." Inside that house, Bartholomew Crane was not dead, at least not in the way men die. He wandered through the empty rooms, half awake, half dreaming. His reflection no longer followed him. The mirrors had turned black, swallowing his image. Sometimes he thought he heard Eleanor's footsteps behind him. Sometimes he realized they were his own. He no longer knew how many days had passed. The clocks had stopped. The air shimmered, thick with the smell of honey and sickness. He tried to pray, but the words came out backward, as if some part of him no longer belonged to God. Then, one night, he heard laughter, soft, warm, familiar. He followed it to the cellar. The candles there were still burning, though no one had lit them. In the center of the floor lay the circle of salt from the night of the ritual. Inside it, Eleanor stood waiting, her gown torn, her hair wild. "Bartholomew," she whispered, "you came back." He stepped closer. "What have we done, Eleanor? What have we brought here?" She smiled sadly. "You wanted fortune. You got it. But every coin has two sides." She reached down and lifted a small wooden box from the floor. "Delacroix left this for you. He said you'd understand when the time came." Crane opened it. Inside lay a tiny, shriveled heart, black, hard, no larger than a walnut. It beat once in his hand. He dropped it in horror. "What is this?" Eleanor's eyes glowed faintly. It's what keeps Natchez alive, as long as it beats. The fever won't stop. Break it, and everything dies with it. Even me. Crane stared at her. You want me to destroy you. She stepped closer, touched his face gently. You already did long ago. Now finish it. He hesitated. What happens after? The river will take what it's owed, she said. And it will sleep again. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he picked up the heart. It pulsed once more faintly. He raised it trembling. Eleanor smiled. Thank you. He crushed it in his fist. The candles went out. The ground shuddered. Somewhere deep beneath the house, something screamed. Not loud, but endless, like wind tearing through bone. Crane fell to his knees, gasping. The floor split open, black water flooding up from below. It poured through the rooms, through the hallways, bursting the windows, carrying the stench of rotten flowers. He called her name, but she was gone. Only her voice remained, whispering softly through the roar of the flood, "The debt is paid." Then the water swallowed him. At dawn the river had risen 10 feet, covering half the town. The few survivors who still clung to life watched as the Crane mansion collapsed into the current, the last of its walls sinking beneath the yellow foam. Within days, the fever was gone, the air cleared. The dead stopped rising. But the people who remained never spoke of what happened there. They buried their dead and burned their homes, trying to erase the memory. Years passed. The ruins of the mansion disappeared beneath vines and moss. Travelers said the place was cursed. The river changed course to avoid it. But on some nights, when the fog rolled in from the water, people claimed to hear faint music drifting from the trees, like a waltz played far away. A century later, when settlers tried to rebuild near the old site, a workers digging foundations unearthed fragments of black glass melted into the soil, and underneath it all, a skeleton, its bones fused with silver coins. Its skull turned toward the river as if listening. The man in charge of the excavation ordered the remains reburied. But the workers refused. One of them, an old river pilot, crossed himself and said, "Leave it. That's the banker who sold his soul." The site was sealed again. Today, the land is quiet. The trees grow thick, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and wild roses. But nothing stays green for long. Leaves yellow early, as if the soil itself remembers. Locals call it the Fever Ground. They say no birds sing there. And if you listen closely by the water's edge, you can hear a woman humming softly, her reflection moving a breath behind her. Some say it's Eleanor Crane, still waiting for her husband by the river. Others say it's something older, the spirit that answered their call that night in 1786. But the old river pilots tell another story. They say every 100 years, when the water runs low and the fog is thick, a pale woman boards passing boats, asking for passage to Natchez. She carries a single red rose and a vial of black water. If you refuse her, the river stays calm. But if you let her aboard, someone always dies before sunrise. No one has ever seen her face clearly. Those who did were found days later, their eyes yellow and their skin cold as marble. And yet, the legend lives on, because sometimes, under the right moon, when the Mississippi glows like gold, you can still see the shape of a great house beneath the water, windows flickering with candlelight. And if you listen, really listen, you'll hear a voice whisper through the mist, "The debt is never paid, it only sleeps."